Cheers, everyone. Dave Brown here with the New Populace. Thank you again for joining me. So, we are on the eve of this NATO summit where all the big brains in the West will get together to figure out how they're going to drive the Russians out of Ukraine. And 17 months into this conflict, I'm not exactly sure what they're going to come up with because Russia is firmly embedded in the Donbass. They have three defense lines that are heavily fortified, and a month into this Ukrainian counteroffensive, they have gained little ground. They're operating in this gray area, and they haven't even come close to penetrating even the first Russian defense line. So I'm not exactly sure what NATO can come up with that will give Ukraine more success. Now, a funny thing about this NATO summit, we just had Erdogan, the president of Turkey, meet with Zelensky, and he said that he thinks that Ukraine should be welcomed into NATO immediately, or something to that effect. And I laughed when I heard that because of all the people, all the world leaders, Erdogan is definitely the shiftiest, most slippery one out there. Now, he is in a weird position. He's part of NATO, but at the same time, he's had a relationship with Putin and Russia. So he's sort of trying to walk that line there between being, being true to NATO or being part of NATO, and at the same time, not pissing off Putin too much. So when he said that, here's my first thought. He said it right after Biden said that it was not time for Ukraine to come into NATO. So in a way, he was pushing it in our faces that we weren't serious about having Ukraine in NATO. So once he heard Biden say that, well, then he can go, hey, Zelensky, yeah, you should be in NATO. Why not? Knowing that it's not going to happen, and just makes us, again, look bad because we're playing this game with Ukraine, dangling NATO as a carrot without any real intent to actually bring him in. So he's playing both sides, Erdogan. And he's a real slippery guy. I guess that's good for Turkey. He was just reelected, so apparently the Turks feel that he's the guy to lead Turkey. So good for you. He's certainly a crafty guy, and from the Western perspective or the Russian perspective, it can be annoying, but perhaps he's doing exactly what is best for Turkey. Now, back to this counteroffensive and the idea that Ukraine is going to be able to make any progress in the Donbass against these Russian fortifications. There's another problem that just came up, and that is the issue of ammunition. And I've said from the beginning that Russia is simply going to outproduce NATO. And we had an admission from our president, Joe Biden, that Ukraine is running out of ammunition. Listen to what he says here.
Mr. President, any update on the cocaine service?
Mr. President, on cluster munitions, why now?
We've run out of ammunition.
So there you have it. They have run out of ammunition, and so we are now going to provide them with cluster munitions. But wait a second. If they're out of ammunition, why not just give them more 155 shells? Well, John Kirby, the spokesman for the Pentagon, admitted that, well, we, the United States, we're running kind of low. Listen to what he says here in an interview with Martha Raddatz.
But that production rate is still not where we want it to be. So we're going to send these additional artillery shells that have cluster bomblets in them to help bridge the gap as we ramp up production of normal 155 artillery shells.
So,
it will keep
you're
them
sending
in the fight.
those cluster munitions because we don't have enough of the kind of munitions they need.
That is right.
And right at the end there, if you see his face, he's just like all scrunched up, like that is right. He's so embarrassed because he knows. He's not an idiot. He knows exactly what the problem here is that our production is garbage. Ukraine is screwed because now we're giving them these munitions that are banned in most countries because we're simply out of 155 shells. We can't give them any more without dipping into our own personal stock that we need in reserve in case we're in a conflict, and we can no longer give them any more of that. So now we have all these old cluster munitions that are probably 20, 30 years old that we can ship over there to fill in the gap while we ramp up our production. Well, how much are we going to ramp up our production? Because Russia is firing 10, 15, 20, 20,000 rounds per day, which is 4 or 5 times more than Ukraine. And according to this article here, this is from just a few months ago, the Army aims to boost 155 millimeter ammo production to 85,000 rounds per month by 2028. Well, that's 5 years from now. And even then, 85,000 rounds per month, if that's Russia, they fire that in 4 days. So what is that going to do long term to help Ukraine? We simply, at this pace, cannot sustain this war. 100 or 85,000 rounds per month. That is next to nothing in context for the scale of this war. So if we can't provide the munitions, if they're running into a brick wall, that is this Russian defense, these fortified defense lines, if every day they're grabbing guys off the street in Ukraine and forcing them to go to the front to fight the Russians with almost no training, my question to people who are supporting this proxy war, what is your end game here? What is the end game? You can't get Russia out of Donbass. You can't get Russia out of Crimea. Give me an argument for why these cluster munitions might help in that process. Give me an argument for how they could possibly penetrate these fortified lines. Not just one, but 3. Give me an argument. What, F-16s are going to help in 6 months to 9 months when they finally arrive? There is no real strong argument to say that Ukraine could possibly dislodge Russia. So again, at what point do you say enough's enough? It is what it is. All we're doing is sending more men to their deaths. Let's stop and negotiate. And what's really troubling, if you look at the Minsk agreements, that agreement had neutrality for Ukraine. Donbass was still part of Ukraine, just autonomous, and Crimea would remain with Russia. Looking back now, that was a great deal. And then we had the draft agreement March 2022 between Russia and Ukraine, and then Boris Johnson flew in April. The agreement was scrapped, and Ukraine went back to war with the intent, ostensibly, of driving Russia out of Ukraine. So there were many times in the past where there was an arrangement that would have been 10 times better for Ukraine than what they're going to get now today if the war was to stop now. Because Russia has no reason, based on the fact that we're admitting we're running out of ammunition to give Ukraine, they have no reason to stop, pull back, and give territory back. It is simply not going to happen. So the longer this war drags on, the worse it gets for Ukraine, not the better. And the propagandists in the West just sicken me because they keep on giving the appearance that Ukraine, they're making progress because they've got 100 square kilometers here and the gray zone pushing back against Russia. I think that was Ben Wallace from the UK saying, "Oh, look at all this land that the Ukrainians have gotten back in this offensive." This is all land that's in the gray area that Russia has said, or by their tactics shown, they will give up in order to protect their own forces and to draw Ukraine into areas where they can be decimated. So the propaganda is 24/7, trying to give the West and the people in the West the idea or appearance that Ukraine is winning or can win, when in reality, we had John Kirby there say, we don't have any more of these artillery shells. So we have to give them the cluster munitions. But again, we can ramp up production, but we can't make the production needed in order for Ukraine to sustain this war against Russia. So that's pretty bad for us because either the United States can't outproduce Russia, and I keep hearing people say, well, the West, NATO, they're so much bigger than Russia. Certainly certainly NATO and the United States could outproduce Russia. Then my question is, why aren't we? And well, so if we're not and we can, then we're just screwing Ukraine, or we're simply incapable because we do not have the manufacturing in place to make all these weapons and these artillery shells, in which case, might as well negotiate because the longer this goes on, the more people that are going to get killed. Now, if you are China watching this and you're seeing the United States admit our low ammo situation, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but you would think, man, if you were ever going to attack Taiwan, maybe now is the time while we're still tangled up in Ukraine. Again, I don't think that's happening, mainly because January 2024, we have the election in Taiwan, and perhaps this unification between Taiwan and China will happen peacefully without any interference, and it'll be the Taiwanese themselves who choose to reunify with China, and that will end any prospective war with the United States. And of course, the United States, we do not want that. As Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said in an interview, 50% of the world's container traffic go through the Taiwan Straits, and 70% of the world's semiconductors go through there as well. And if Taiwan and China are unified, that gives China domain over that space and a massive bump up in their economic power and economic control of this world, which scares us, the United States, which is why we're constantly trying to inflame things, to start some stuff out there, because we don't want this to happen peacefully, even though we openly say we observe the one China policy and that we're going to be neutral on the matter as long as both sides don't escalate or don't change the status quo. We really don't believe that. We do not want to see any peace or reunification. So we're going to continue to start a little crap over there, and add some bases and do some drills. And then if China responds to that, we go, oh, China, we're just freedom of navigation. What's wrong with that? Stop being the aggressors, man. So that's our line of China as we keep on adding more and more bases in the Philippines, because of course we're full of crap. So that's where things stand now. This Ukraine war needs to end because there's simply no way forward for Ukraine. They're going to keep on hitting this wall. And I'll reiterate one last time, the true intent of the United States was not to defeat Russia. It was to bleed Russia. And Rand Corporation themselves, they said it. They said they want to destabilize Russia by natural gas by cutting off natural gas from Russia, by arming Ukraine, by promoting liberalization in Belarus. And we had the Undersecretary of State, Victoria Nuland, say we're in contact with the Belarus opposition. They wanted to increase other natural gas supply from other parts of Europe to away from Russia, so have more come from Europe to Germany, for example. And Norway had that pipeline open up around the same time that Nord Stream got blown up. So we had all these strategies to try to destabilize Russia and try to draw Russia into a conflict that we hope would bleed them out. We could throw on sanctions, cause the Putin regime to crumble, and then we jump in there and we pick through the scraps. That is the game that the United States plays, and we've been playing for the last 30 years, not just in the Eastern Europe, but in the Middle East, obviously, with our wars there with Libya and Syria, and Iraq, Afghanistan. That is what the United States foreign policy has been. Create problems, and then when the other side reacts to that issue, that problem, we blame them for being aggressive, and then come in and try to topple them, and that's the game we play. And I think the road is onto us now. And the global South, they are not so eager to join in with the United States in trying to condemn and hurt Russia. A lot of them are staying neutral. A lot of them are keeping their relations with Russia good because they realize the game, and they realize it's only a matter of time before they're next. So they better make a stand, and Russia made a stand, whether you agree with it or not. They felt that if they didn't do something at some point, NATO and the West be right on their border, surrounding them, and slowly just choking them off. And of course, that's our plan. And we admitted it's our plan, so it shouldn't be a mystery to anybody. We said we're going to do it, and we did it. It shocks me when people say, "Oh, well, why did Russia invade? They were unprovoked." Just read the documents. Listen to what we've said for the last 8 years. John McCain, Lindsey Graham in Kiev in 2016, talking to the Ukrainian military. We're going to go to Washington to get you the weapons so you can go on the offensive against the Russians. That was 7 years ago. Imagine Russian leaders in Mexico or Canada saying they're going to arm them to go on the offensive against us. There'd be tomahawks flying in there, Apaches. We'd be blowing the whole thing apart if that happened near our borders in those two countries. All of a sudden, boom, we'd be crossing over with our military. It's a joke, but we've been playing that game in Ukraine for 8 years. Finally, there's a response back, and it was unprovoked. Oh my God, why did it happen? Craziness. Well, that's it for now. If you are new to my channel, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.